Will, great to connect. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So I just finished rereading your book, Unreasonable Hospitality. I was in New York City in November and I was with the four kids. So we did not eat at 11 Madison Park, but I did poke my head in just to check it out. Was greeted very warmly and was sent off with a beautiful jar of granola, which became our breakfast for the next few days. And you have impacted me in ways that I wouldn't have expected when I first read your book. I now in my classroom try to apply things I learned. And so anyway,
Mm,
I'm grateful for the chance to talk. I'm grateful for your book and the work you've done and excited to hear or excited for this conversation today.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I'm excited to be here.
So as you think about the experiences you've had, could you share one where you learned something that you would most want to pass on to others?
Yeah, my dad is an extraordinarily important person in my life. He's my dad, obviously, but he's also my best friend and my greatest mentor. And anyone who ever spends any amount of time talking to me will invariably hear me quote him at least once.
Mhm.
And there's so many quotes of his that I love. But the one I feel compelled to talk about now is adversity is a terrible thing to waste. This idea that we cannot always control what life throws at us, but we can control how we react to those moments, what we choose to learn from them, how we use them to fuel our competitive spirit. I had been out of the Madison Park for a few years, and the restaurant was moving in a pretty remarkable direction. But one day I got a letter in the mail saying that we'd been added to the list of the 50 best restaurants in the world. And the letter was an invitation for us to join them at the ceremony that June in London. And so obviously we went. Now, the awards themselves are a lot like the Oscars. Okay, you're in a larger than life auditorium. You're surrounded by your heroes. For me, the chefs that I'd looked up to my entire career, people that I desperately hoped to one day meet. You're wearing your fanciest tuxedo, the whole nine. But they're different from the Oscars in one notable way. At the Oscars, I'd imagine when you're nominated for an award, once they get to your category, you are desperate that they call your name. Here, if you're in that room, you already know you're one of the 50 best. You just don't know where on the list you fall until you get there. They start at 50. They slowly count down to one. Here, you are desperate that they do not call
Mhm.
your name for as long as humanly possible. We had assigned seating. Something about me, I like to gamify pretty much everything in life. I've come to believe it's one of my superpowers as a leader. I think we, as a rule, invest too little of ourselves in just making work fun. But I do like to gamify everything. And so when I saw we had assigned seating, I looked at where we were seated relative to where the restaurants who had come in number one through five the prior year were seated, figuring there must have been a correlation. I turned it into a guessing game and an expression of humility. I guessed we'd come in, I don't know, number 35. Now, listen, I'm sure of the fact there must have been some of the normal preambles, the welcomes from the big debonair British MC, but I don't remember any of that. All I remember was him kicking things off by saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, let's get started at number 50, a new entry from New York City, 11 Madison Park." And I muttered an expletive under my breath. We'd come in last place. Now, some people don't understand why I'd respond that way. We were still top 50 in the world. But for me, in that room, we lost.
Mhm.
And I remember leaving the party embarrassed, going back to the room and doing some real soul searching that night. And it was that night that I wrote the words unreasonable hospitality on a cocktail napkin for the first time underneath the goal that I stated that night for the first time, which was that we will be number one in the world. I look back on that night now with gratitude because I do not believe we would have gone on to become the number one restaurant in the world absent that feeling of disappointment that first year. And it was one of the many experiences in my life that validated my dad's wisdom. I look back at the girlfriend I had right before I met my wife who broke my heart And although in that moment it felt like the end of everything, I'm so grateful that she did. Because had she not, I would not have met my person. I look back in a way at the experience of my mother when I was a kid being diagnosed with brain cancer and ultimately becoming a quadriplegic with some amount of gratitude. Because, well, yes, obviously I wish she was still alive and healthy. I would not have that relationship with my dad now
Hmm.
were it not for us having to team up and care for her. There's a question that people ask often: what advice would you give your 20-year-old self? And one of the greatest answers I heard was no advice, because I want that person to go through all the seasons of adversity that I did, because those are the seasons that made me who I am today. And well, I don't believe anyone has the wherewithal to, in moments of adversity, immediately seek out the silver linings, nor do I think that that's a healthy response. I do want my children to, at a certain point, recognize that adversity is a beautiful thing and a terrible thing to waste.
So amazing story. And the
Mhm.
first question I think of is, how do you do it? How do you make sure you don't waste it? And how did you make sure you didn't waste that night?
Well, I think, like anything, it's through just being intentional, um, through being optimistic. And by the way, it's not like an immediate thing. I believe, like most great things in life, it's incremental. I think in moments of adversity, we need to give ourselves the grace to fully feel the weight of whatever disappointment we have faced. And then once we have the ability to look at whatever has happened through a new lens. I think in moments of failure, we can use that to become more competitive, to dig deeper, to find the energy needed to win. In moments of loss, we can grow closer to those that have been left behind. And and there's little examples that fall in so many places in between those two extremes. But I think it's about recognizing that no one moment defines you. It's your response that defines you. Through a generally optimistic perspective, that there's always good things ahead if you're willing to put in the work to find them. And through this recognition that life is a marathon, it's not a sprint.
Yeah. So that night you write, you're going to be number one, and you write these words, unreasonable hospitality. So can you describe an example or two of how you were able to incorporate unreasonable hospitality into your business and life?
I mean, in my business, gosh, there's so many different ways to approach that. I think it required a fundamental shift in how we looked at what we did. So many people who have achieved any level of success have done so through being unreasonable in pursuit of bringing the most fully realized version of a product or service to life. It was about recognizing that how we made people feel was just as, if not more important than those things. And we should reserve some of our best efforts for that. With the team, it could be focusing on a greater culture of empowerment, or creating a culture of ownership. With the people we served, it looked like having people on the team whose only role and responsibility was to come up with crazy one size fits one gestures we could convey that actually gave them something to hold on to. That position was called the Dreamweaver, and they were responsible for everything from buying sleds for a family whose kids were seeing snow for the first time so that their after meal activity could be sledding for the first time in Central Park, or creating beach scenes in our private dining room for a couple who was only there because their beach vacation got canceled. All things that just made the people we were serving feel genuinely seen as individuals, which at the end of the day is what I believe we all want more than anything. And things that created the kind of memories that people were able to hold on to. I found time and time again that we were serving some of the best food in the world, but very few people remember anything they ate when they were with us. They remember the big and little things that we did as human beings for them as specific human beings. In life, it's about taking that exact same approach, but just to the people that you are walking down the road of life alongside. One of my favorite definitions of hospitality is it is being creative and intentional in pursuit of relationships.
Hmm.
Unreasonable hospitality in life is just choosing the relationships that matter to you and as often as possible making the choice to pursue them. I heard a quote the other day from someone I met after I did a talk. He shared a family mantra of his and how my speech made him think of it. He said, in their family, they say, never let a gracious impulse pass. We all have these impulses, these moments of inspiration where we want to do something kind for someone else. Unreasonable hospitality is caring enough to listen so that you can come up with those ideas, but then also doing something with what you've heard.
So I love your approach at the restaurant. Of course, you're serving excellent food, and of course, the delivery is top notch, but you went all in on the guests' feelings, and that's a non-obvious choice for a restaurateur seeking to be number one. And as I think about this new world that we're living in that is so digital and
Mm-mm.
so AI based, I think one of the most AI proof things in the world is human connection. And I love the quote, never let a gracious impulse pass. And I appreciate your work because this is what I'm trying to do in the classroom now. It's the classroom is a place to learn, of course, but after thinking about what you're doing, it's like, yeah, but this is really a chance to make people feel something. And that's the goal on top of just helping people learn,
Yeah, increasingly, so much of education you could argue could be done over a screen.
right?
The distinction and what makes gathering people together in a classroom special, well, it only happens when you make those moments as human as humanly possible, when you understand that bringing people together and creating the conditions through which they can connect, inspire one another, share ideas, connect, and form a community. That's when learning in person becomes the kind of thing that education over a screen could never even
Yeah,
come
you can't
close to
replicate.
touching.
Yeah.
The problem is, similar to restaurants, I would imagine for many, many, many educators out there, it's not something they've ever even paused for long enough to consider. They invest all of their best efforts into the material
Yeah.
that is being exchanged as a monologue from the teacher to the student. Absent this understanding that we are trying to create not just a dialogue between two people, but an exchange amongst everyone in the room. I don't think we're nearly getting to the point where we're extracting as much value from that experience as we can.
There's magic that happens when we're intentional about creating these spaces with people together. I love the work that you're doing. Like I said, it's inspired me. It's totally changed how I think about teaching and what my role as a professor is. So it's not just about delivering material. It's about let's go to dinner tonight and let's talk about the discussion we had. Come over to my house and let's
Yeah.
eat and let's talk about what you're doing this summer. And I've I've enjoyed teaching more. I think the students have enjoyed it more. And but for you doing this at a restaurant in New York City, I don't think I'm doing this. So, well, any final things you'd like to share just as we wrap up here?
Uh, I'm straying very far from where this conversation started, but I think when you talk about the in-person experience with in a classroom, really honestly, any kind of experience, no detail is too small to be poured into. I hosted an event here in Nashville, and I had some amazing friends who have a band called the Lone Bellow perform. And before they started, I went onto stage and I said to everyone that was there for my event, hey, these guys are special. I don't want this to be music in the background. I want this to be our full focus. And so please, everyone, if you could, just press pause on your conversations for the next 15 minutes. Come very close. Anyone who is not overly precious about what they're wearing, sit on the ground right here next to the stage. Like, I want us to be uncomfortably close. And then they played. And because of the intimacy of people receiving an invitation to stop talking to one another for a moment, to be asked to get as close to the stage as humanly possible, the show was obviously much, much more special, but such a different experience than had I just let people stand or sit wherever and carry on with their conversation. I think sometimes we are scared to give too much direction. But when you can give the kind of direction that will enhance what people can take away from an experience, that is not an ask, it's a gift. And it's something I think we can start to do more consistently to make the most out of these moments, which, let's name it, are increasingly fewer and further between. And even when they happen, are quite fleeting.
A former guest of the podcast is a professor from Hebrew University named Avi Kluger. Avi is one of the world's experts on listening, and he describes these magic moments that are co-created when people listen to each other and connect. And one way to view what you did with that musical group was you just told everybody, just listen, listen very carefully. And it's kind of crazy to think that the default in our world now is to have them up there playing their music, pouring their heart into it, and people are on their phones.
Yeah.
People are scrolling Instagram, X, rather than just being together. I love the phrase, never let a gracious impulse pass. No detail is too small to be poured into. Such great stuff, Will.
Thank you so much, man.
Thanks for coming on the podcast. Love it. I'm going to keep working on this. I'm going to listen to this again to continue to inspire me. So thanks so much for coming on the podcast.